Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me along to talk to you today about CIFAS's experience of identity fraud in the digital age. We've heard a lot today about fraud in the retail sector, and I do hope our findings will demonstrate the serious problem of identity fraud in the digital age. So, what am I going to cover? Well, first of all, I'm going to talk about CIFAS and how it works. To some of you, we're an unknown quantity, while to others, you may know quite well of us and what we do. And to those people, I apologise if I go over some of your knowledge. I will look at the trends we identified during 2011 and compare them to 2010. What areas are the fraudsters targeting? What products are on the top of their wish list? We'll look at how methods have changed for the fraudsters and how they've adapted to the digital age. And what about the future? So firstly, CIFAS is a not-for-profit membership organisation. It was set up in 1988 by 8 retailers who had seen a rise in fraud and didn't know how to tackle it. They held a conference very similar to this where they invited a policeman along, and he listened to all what they had to say, and at the end, when he stood up to make his speech, he took it out of his pocket, he ripped it up, and he said, "The only way you are going to fight fraud is to work together." And that's how CIFAS become. We're a world first in fraud data sharing. We're funded by our members, and we're also a specified anti-fraud organisation. So the public sector have a gateway of sharing information with the private sector. The information on our database are all confirmed frauds. We don't deal in suspect data. So the frauds on our database can be identified as a fraud. There will be the evidence to show that a fraud has taken place, and the member will be prepared to report that case to the police. And it's not until all 3 of those criteria are fulfilled can a member put a case on our database. And it prevents those same identities being used again for fraud. We believe that fraud data is non-competitive. It was interesting to hear in the speech by Fran this morning that 45% of retailers were against sharing fraud data, often quoting competitor sensitivity. Well, firstly, if you share data through CIFAS and other proven fraud prevention databases, you can legally share that data. We are data protection compliant, we deal with the Information Commissioner, so data can be shared in a safe, secure environment. Secondly, there is no competitor benefit in not sharing data. If we had 3 retailers, A, B and C shared data, the fraudster would just target retailer B. What competitor advantage is there in that? And we believe all our members must cooperate and communicate in the interest of crime prevention. So who are our members? You'll see from this that we have over 260 members covering probably all the financial institutions you can think of and more. As I said, we now have 5 public sector organisations sharing fraud through our database, and that can only be a very helpful and positive thing for anybody wishing to prevent fraud. As fraudsters don't operate in silos, they'll be hitting the public sector as much as they will be hitting you, the retailers. So, how does CIFAS work? Well, CIFAS is built on reciprocity. You must contribute to the database to benefit from the database. And what happens is a member identifies a fraud. They file that to our database. A subset of that database is shared with our participating agencies who are Experian, Call Credit, Equifax, Synectics, and Experian Decision Analytics. That doesn't mean to say you have to be using any of these organisations to retrieve CIFAS data. You can come direct to us for that information. So that's how a member records a fraud. How they benefit is when either someone applies or perhaps they want to look at a collections book. They will run that information through either one of our participating agencies or through our database direct, and they'll be advised that there's fraud data there. The member then goes into our database and retrieves all the information on that fraud case. So what information does each case hold? Each case on find holds all the details shown here. It gives a picture of the fraudster and the fraud, so anyone matching can immediately check their application or account to see whether they're dealing with the same individual. Being an internet-based database means members can embed the National Fraud Database within their systems, so searches can be made automatically when an application is made. It also has the flexibility to allow batch searching, as some members prefer this service. As well as being a front-end product, Find is also available to members to use throughout a customer life cycle. This could be where a change of address is made and a delivery requested immediately after that change of address. Checking the new address to see where the fraudulent activity has taken place can help you preventing goods to that known address. Cases are matched by a series of data matching rules. This means that the returned case is either the same individual or there are common factors within the case that require investigation, such as the same contact details or financial details, and very often it will be the telephone number, as fraudsters tend to take this with them as the one piece of information that remains the same. It will also return cases where there's been activity within the last 30 days, as again this is an indication of fraudulent activity. We currently have over 300,000 fraud cases on the National Fraud Database. Within those cases, there are 321,000 subjects and almost 425,000 unique addresses. And I say unique addresses because the actual number of addresses is considerably more, but fraud often occurs more than once at a particular address. I've not included data on victims on this slide, but if I were to include them in these statistics, subjects would rise to around 570,000 subjects and 750,000 addresses. In the past 5 years, our members have reported over £4 billion of benefit through being members of CIFAS. So I think that could argue very much against competitor sensitivity. So what types of fraud are recorded on the National Fraud Database? Well, we have identity fraud, what we're talking about today, which is the use of a false or bogus identity or the use of an innocent person's details to obtain a benefit. There's facility takeover fraud, which is another type of identity fraud, and this is where the fraudster knows the security details of a victim and then uses them to get through those security details and either change the address and order a new card or to facilitate the movement of money to an account accessible by a fraudster. We also deal with application fraud, which I think speaks for itself, where someone makes a false application, asset conversion, the misuse of facility, and false insurance claims. But we'll probably save those for another day. So, how is identity fraud committed? If only we knew all the ways. As soon as we plug one hole, the fraudsters come up with another. But in general terms, false identity fraud is where the fraudster uses those genuine details, usually relying on the good credit rating of that victim to obtain an account or facility. Facility takeover, as I said, is where the fraudster gains access to the genuine details of the victims. This can happen at the current address of the victim, and it could be a family member, a shared mailbox, or mail interception. Often we find identity fraud is committed in what we call previous address fraud. Here, the victim is merrily living at the previous address quoted on an application, and the fraudster said he's only just moved into this new address. Therefore, all the checks are based upon what is at that previous address. And in this case, because no letters are ever sent to the previous address, the victim at that previous address has no knowledge until a debt collector or like turns up on his doorstep. Previous occupier fraud is where someone's moved out of an address, but in most cases, junk mail continues to be delivered, often credit cards that are pre-populated, and to a fraudster, that's very tempting information. Joint application fraud, well, we all think we know our partners, or we like to think we know our partners, but it's surprising how many other halves will make an application in joint details without the other half ever knowing. And then we have deceased fraud, a hideous form of identity fraud, where the details of someone deceased is used to obtain a product or service. And it's not only individuals who are impersonated, companies are victims of identity fraud too, so no one is immune. So what are our headline figures for 2011? Well, unsurprisingly, identity fraud has grown by 10%, with the biggest rise being seen in facility takeover cases. 25,000 genuine account holders have had or have attempted to have had their account taken over by a fraudster. In these cases, the most frustrating question for the victim is, how did they get my security details? Although mail order and communication sectors have the highest number of frauds registered, it is interesting to note that we are now seeing an increase in identity fraud on plastic cards, which is in contrast to the decline over the previous 2 years. The rise in the communication sector is predominantly down to mobile phones. This increase can be attributed to the emergence of the smartphone as a must-have gadget. Fraudsters are prepared to impersonate even their own family members to obtain a smartphone, but also organised fraudsters are attracted to this product as they attempt to obtain them en masse to sell them on. When committing an identity fraud, the internet is seen as the fraudster's friend. 74% of all identity frauds committed were made via the internet. Surprisingly, the next route of choice was a retailer or dealer. Clearly, the fraudster thinks commission-led sales are less stringent in their checks than the other methods of application. Our research shows that victims of impersonation are concentrated in urban areas. High levels of identity fraud are most prominent in London and its commuter belt, the Midlands and the North West. Victims of facility takeover fraud, however, are more widespread, such as the Western, Orkney and Shetland Isles, Central Wales and the Cumbrian coast. They all reveal a greater proportion of victims of takeover than victims of impersonation. Another growth product for the fraudster is a personal loan. With payments being made direct into bank accounts, it's no wonder the fraudster likes applying for this product. One area of concern for all of us is the high number of credit files applied for fraudulently. Nearly 5,000 attempts were made last year, and once in the hands of a fraudster, identity fraud is therefore very simple. They have all the information they need at their hand. The most commonly impersonated individual is a man aged between 41 and 50, and there are a few of you in the audience today. Our research presents an overarching pattern of fraud being concentrated in the southeast Thames Valley and along the M6, M62, M4, M5 corridors. In London, the postal districts most used for fraud are E6 East Ham, IG11 Barking, and SE18 Woolwich. None of those, I'm sure, would surprise you. So, why are fraudsters more likely to impersonate a victim than create a false identity? Well, in the past, documents such as passports and driving licences were obtained through physical criminal means. Either a house was burgled or a handbag snatched, and this provided the fraudster with the documents most usually required to open an account or to just prove their identity. Although this is a satisfactory way of obtaining documents, it does come with its own risks. Wearing a mask gives a degree of anonymity, but it's not the same as the anonymity making applications through the internet affords. So, what has changed? Well, the same documents that were traditionally stolen can now be obtained at a cost via the internet. Just type identity documents into Google and an array of websites will be displayed offering passports, driving licenses and bank statements, to name just a few. Here, the fraudster will select a victim and he will then create a whole identity around him. The victim obviously has no knowledge of this. These websites are covered with a disclaimer which says these products are novelty products, and therefore it's very difficult to shut them down. However, if you're a victim, they're not quite so funny. Having seen some of these documents provided by the websites, I must admit they would fool all but the most experienced investigators. Certainly front-end staff, such as retail staff, would not be able to spot a fake. When we look again at traditional methods, personal information would be obtained through other means such as bin raiding, the phone directory, shoulder surfing, and although adequate, sometimes this meant the fraudster had to carry out additional work to commit the fraud. Never a good thing for a fraudster, as they want the most benefit from the least work. Today, personal information is held in so many more mediums. Our data is stored in government departments, employee database, consumer web, consumer sites, and it can be transported via the internet, memory sticks, and of course, all these can be hacked into or regrettably lost. All consumers, especially the young, are happy to share all their personal information on social media sites. This means it is accessible to fraudsters in an easy, convenient format. We all have a responsibility to protect our information, so perhaps a campaign on the size of protecting against bin raiding is needed to educate everybody about the threat of identity fraud on the internet. And as fraudsters get youngster, who knows what might happen in the future. Our mobile phones have now become our personal mobile computers. We use them for social media sites, internet banking, and making purchases. But how many people think about the wireless network they may be connecting to when merrily inputting their security details or card details? Who might also have access to an open site, and what might they be looking for? We must all understand that our data is valuable, and using an unsecure site is equivalent to standing on the corner of the road handing out your data to passerbys. Sometimes data compromise is out of our control. Every year we hear about data being lost. Be it personal details or card details, the damage to the individual must be measured not only in financial losses, but emotional distress. Once someone's details have been used, there is always that uncomfortable feeling of who has used my details, how are they obtained, and what do they really know about me? There is also a reputational risk to the company, as will the consumer ever trust that company again? I've selected a few snippets off the internet about the extent of the problem. I think one of the most interesting is that Garlic recently reported online gangsters flogging Facebook and Twitter passwords to other criminals for £20 a go. With data piling up, the hackers have launched factory outlets, just like high street shopping outlets, and where they're selling their bounty at a knockdown price because they just have too much stock. The danger, apart from the obvious ability to wreak havoc, is that scammers can surreptitiously use Facebook and Twitter to trick their victims into downloading powerful viruses, then using the access to their online banking pages by stealth. One other interesting fact was a recent survey by Symantec of 1,900 small businesses around the globe found that firms are plainly aware of cyber threats. They single out specific problems like target attacks, keystroke logging, and the dangers of using smartphones for company business. But the Threat Awareness Survey also showed a considerable apathy towards security. With half of the respondents replying, they didn't feel in danger because they were a small firm. Unfortunately, the evidence is not on their side. Symantec's research showed that since the beginning of 2010, 40% of all targeted attacks have been directed at small and medium-sized businesses, compared to only 28% directed at large companies. So with so much data and so much crime, I think CSI cyberspace should be introduced. Much has been said about the fraudster's ability to obtain personal data. One concrete way of obtaining the most up-to-date personal data, including security details, is by getting someone working for the organisation to pass the information to you. This could be by either paying a member of staff for each data set or by getting someone employed within the organisation. Either way, the results can be catastrophic. Alongside our National Fraud Database, we operate a staff fraud database, which is open to any company willing to share information on staff fraudsters. It can be used to vet applicants for employment or existing staff. My slide is a little bit out of date now. Sorry, that seems to have got slightly out of order. There, we're back where we should be. So, my slide is slightly out of date because we now have over 1,300 confirmed fraudsters on our database. And the question I must ask you is, where are they employed now? So in conclusion, the growth in identity fraud continues unabated. Fraudsters are happy to use the genuine details of the victim and have the ability to intercept the post so the victim is unaware of the fraud. They intercept deliveries by waiting in the garden or washing the car, somewhat unsophisticated techniques, but yet still effective. In an age when consumers want everything and they want it now, it is not surprising to see that personal loans are on the list of products of choice. Loans can be paid into accounts the same day, and the money taken as a cash withdrawal, leaving no trail to find that money. Another technique favoured by the fraudster is the high-volume, low-value approach. Instead of applying for high-value products, they will make multiple applications for smaller value items, as they're more likely to get these through than one large item. To the fraudster, it's not the product they're after. This will be sold, and the cash will then be used to fund more serious organised crime. I have put the internet as a valuable tool for the fraudster, as this is twofold. Firstly, the proliferation of personal information people are prepared to post on the internet. And secondly, the internet being used to supply fraudulent documentation. The added bonus of anonymity really makes the internet the fraudster's friend, and we should all bear this in mind when we're using the internet. I thank you for listening, and if you require any further information regarding CIFAS and the work we do, please do not hesitate to contact me. On our website, there are 3 documents you see there. The first one, Fraudscape, which is the in-depth analysis of our database over the last 12 months. And Staff Fraudster will be coming soon by beginning of May, again giving the in-depth analysis of the staff fraud database. Thank you.
Thank you.